Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a silence so powerful it shakes someone to their core. A silence that speaks louder than arguments, tears, or endless explanations. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey into that quiet force, the moment a narcissist realizes you've finally given up. This isn't about revenge, anger, or cruelty. It's about reclaiming your power, your peace, and your life. From confusion to panic, from control to freedom, you'll see the invisible stages unfold and discover the ultimate truth. When you choose yourself, nothing can ever take your strength away. Letting go is not loud. It doesn't announce itself with arguments, ultimatums, or dramatic exits. True emotional withdrawal is quiet, almost invisible to anyone not paying close attention. It happens in the stillness after you've exhausted every explanation, every apology, every attempt to be understood. One day, you wake up and realize you no longer have the energy to prove your worth. You stop reacting, not because you don't care, but because you finally care about yourself more. This kind of letting go is deeply unsettling to someone who relied on control. A narcissistic dynamic feeds on noise, emotional responses, resistance, pleading, and engagement of any kind. Conflict reassures them that they still matter, that they still have access to your inner world. Silence, on the other hand, offers no reflection. It denies them fuel. When you stop reacting, you remove the mirror they depended on to see themselves as powerful. What makes this silence so powerful is that it isn't punishment, it's peace. It isn't manipulation, it's clarity. You're no longer trying to win, fix, or convince. You're simply choosing not to participate in a cycle that drains you. That choice doesn't come from anger, it comes from emotional maturity. And that maturity feels threatening to someone whose sense of worth depends on dominance and control. To the outside world, it may look like nothing happened, but internally, it's a seismic shift. You've moved from survival mode into self-respect. You've stopped handing your emotional state to someone else for management. And in doing so, you quietly reclaim your power. That quiet withdrawal creates a vacuum where control once lived. And that vacuum breeds panic. Because control only survives where access exists, and silence is the closing of the door without slamming it. Letting go doesn't shout, it doesn't explain itself, it simply walks away whole. And once that silence settles in, something remarkable happens. The space you leave behind doesn't stay empty, it echoes. Because when you stop reacting, when you stop feeding the cycle, the narcissist is forced to sit alone with the sound of their own thoughts. And that's when the second truth reveals itself. A narcissist feeds on reaction, and your peace becomes their panic. For so long, your emotions were their energy source. Your anger reassured them they still mattered. Your sadness confirmed their influence. Even your attempts to explain yourself were proof that they still had a grip on your heart. Every reaction told them, I still have access to you. But peace tells a very different story. Peace says, you no longer control how I feel. And that's terrifying to someone whose sense of power comes from emotional dominance. Your calm isn't something they can manipulate. Your silence isn't something they can twist. When you stop engaging, they lose their ability to steer the narrative. They poke, provoke, and test, waiting for the familiar spark. But it doesn't come. And the absence of that spark feels like suffocation. What you may not realize is that your peace isn't passive. It's active resistance. It's you choosing regulation over reaction, clarity over chaos. And the more grounded you become, the more unstable the dynamic feels to them. Your stillness highlights their unrest. Your emotional balance exposes their dependency on disorder. This is why peace unsettles them more than confrontation ever did. Conflict gave them something to work with. Peace leaves them powerless. It forces them to face the truth that your emotional world no longer revolves around them. In that realization, panic sets in. Not because you're doing something to them, but because you've stopped allowing them to do something to you. Your calm becomes the mirror they can't escape. And in that reflection, control begins to crumble. And as that control begins to crumble, something even more unsettling takes its place. Your absence starts to speak louder than your arguments ever did. Not the kind of absence measured in distance, but the emotional absence that changes the temperature of every room. You're there, yet you're no longer available. And that shift carries a weight no raised voice ever could. Arguments kept you tethered. Every debate, every explanation, every tear was proof that you were still invested, still fighting to be heard. To them, conflict was connection. It meant you cared enough to stay engaged. But now there's no resistance to push against, no energy to siphon, and that silence isn't empty, it's definitive. Your absence forces them to confront something they avoided for a long time. Life without your emotional labor. There's no one to regulate their moods, no one to absorb the blame, no one to translate chaos into calm. And in that void, reality becomes deafening because arguments distract from truth, but absence exposes it. What's powerful here is that you didn't announce your depart. You didn't demand acknowledgement. You simply stopped showing up in the ways that cost you your peace. And that quiet withdrawal lands harder than any ultimatum. It tells them, without a single word, that you no longer need them to validate your experience. Your absence shifts the balance. It takes away the stage they performed on. Without your reactions, their tactics fall flat, echoing into nothing. And for the first time, they feel unseen, not because you're withholding, but because you've finally turned inward. This is where the power truly changes hands, not through confrontation, but through completion. You finish the conversation inside yourself. And when you stop arguing for your worth, you communicate something unmistakable. You already know it. That knowing resonates louder than any argument ever could. And it marks the moment they realize they no longer have a place in your inner world. And when they no longer have a place in your inner world, something shifts inside you as well. What once felt like loss begins to feel like relief. This is the moment many people misunderstand from the outside, because detachment looks cold when you don't know the journey it took to get there. But detachment is not weakness. It is emotional graduation. You didn't detach because you stopped caring. You detached because caring was costing you pieces of yourself. Detachment is what happens when love is no longer confused with endurance, when loyalty is no longer measured by how much pain you can tolerate. It's the quiet realization that you are allowed to leave situations that require you to abandon yourself to stay connected. For a long time, your strength was used against you. Your empathy kept you trying. Your patience kept you hoping. But graduation happens when you realize that resilience doesn't mean staying. Sometimes it means releasing. You stop trying to change them and you start choosing yourself. That choice doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from wisdom. From their perspective, this feels like betrayal. They mistake your emotional boundaries for cruelty because they benefited from your lack of them. But what they're really witnessing is growth. You've learned to regulate your emotions without external validation. You've learned that peace doesn't need permission. And in doing so, you've stepped into a higher level of self-respect. Detachment creates clarity. You no longer personalize their behavior or internalize their projections. You see patterns instead of promises, reality instead of potential. And once you see clearly, you can't unsee it. That's why this stage feels final, because it is. You haven't shut down, you've leveled up, you've graduated from chaos, from cycles, from needing someone else's acknowledgement to confirm your worth. And as you stand there steady and self-possessed, they sense it, not as rejection, but as permanence. Because detachment isn't a pause, it's a turning point, and there's no going back to who you were before you learned to choose yourself. And once you've graduated to that level of clarity, something inevitable happens. The structure they depended on begins to collapse because control only survives where access is allowed, and you've quietly closed the door. Not with anger, not with blame, but with boundaries that don't argue and explanations that no longer exist. They feel it immediately. The usual levers don't work, the guilt doesn't land, the charm doesn't reach you, the provocations fall flat. What once pulled you back in now echoes unanswered. And in that absence of access, panic takes root. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because they no longer know how to reach you. Control requires participation. It needs engagement, emotional availability, and a willingness to doubt yourself. But you're no longer negotiating your reality. You trust your perception now. You've stopped handing your emotional steering wheel to someone else, and when access is denied, the illusion of control shatters. This is where the dynamic fully reverses. They're no longer leading the emotional dance. They're chasing it, trying to re-enter a space you've already outgrown. And the more grounded you become, the more desperate that reaching feels, because your stability exposes the fragility of their influence. What's important to understand? is that you didn't take power from them. You simply stopped giving it away. You didn't manipulate the situation, you matured beyond it. And maturity is something control can't coexist with. It requires chaos to survive. So when they sense that access is gone for good, the panic isn't loud at first. It's internal. A reckoning with irrelevance, a confrontation with the truth that they can no longer affect you the way they once did. And that realization is devastating. But for you, it's liberating because the door you closed wasn't locked in anger. It was closed in self-respect. And once that happens, control doesn't just weaken. It disappears. And when that control disappears, what follows isn't random chaos. It's a pattern. Panic doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds in stages, each one driven by a single haunting fear, irrelevance. Because when access is gone and control has collapsed, the narcissist is forced to face a question they've spent their life avoiding. Do I still matter if I can't affect you? At first, the panic is subtle, confusion, restlessness. They replay old interactions, searching for a moment where they can reinsert themselves. Then comes denial, the belief that this is temporary, that you'll return once the silence becomes uncomfortable. But the silence doesn't break. And that's when the fear deepens. Next comes urgency. They test different versions of themselves, kinder, louder, angrier, more charming, anything to see what still works. This isn't strategy, it's survival. Because every failed attempt confirms the same truth, your emotional world no longer orbits this. As the stages progress, panic becomes visible. The calm facade cracks. They lash out or self-victimize, swinging between grandiosity and collapse. Not because you're attacking them, but because irrelevance feels like erasure. To someone who built their identity on impact and control, being emotionally insignificant is unbearable. What's important here is that none of this is about love or loss in the way you experience it. It's about identity. Your detachment forces them to confront a self that exists without an audience. And that confrontation is destabilizing. Meanwhile, you're steady, watching without reacting, not out of cruelty, but because you've already processed what they're only beginning to feel. You're no longer in the stages. You're past them. This is the quiet power of healing. While panic moves them through predictable cycles, you remain grounded in clarity. Their fear of irrelevance grows louder, while your sense of self grows stronger. And in that contrast, the final truth becomes undeniable. You didn't disappear. You evolved beyond their reach. And as you watch those stages unfold, something inside you settles into a deep, unshakable certainty. This is the moment where the shift becomes irreversible, because you've stopped explaining yourself. And when the explanations end, the power quietly changes hands. For so long, you believed that if you could just find the right words, clarity would bring understanding. You explained your pain. You explained your boundaries. You explained your needs. Each explanation was an offering of vulnerability, a hope that being understood would finally lead to being respected. But explanation in the wrong hands becomes leverage. It gives someone material to twist, minimize, or use against you. So one day you stop, not out of bitterness, but out of realization. You recognize that people committed to misunderstanding, you don't need more information. They need less access. And that decision marks a turning point, because the moment you stop justifying your feelings, you stop asking for permission to have them. To them, this feels like defiance. The silence where explanations used to live signals something final. You're no longer negotiating reality. You're no longer defending your truth. You're standing in it. And standing in your truth doesn't require an audience. This is where panic sharpens. Without your explanations, they lose the ability to redirect blame. They can no longer argue you into self-doubt. The fog lifts and the imbalance becomes visible to both of you, but only one of you is prepared to live with it. You've learned that clarity doesn't come from being understood. It comes from understanding yourself. And once you do, explanations become unnecessary. You move differently. You speak less, but with more intention. You listen more to your intuition than to outside noise. This is the moment power shifts, not through confrontation, but through self-trust. And self-trust is something no one can take from you, especially not someone who only thrived when you doubted yourself. And standing in that self-trust opens the door to something even deeper, the reclamation of your self-worth. Because when you stop explaining, you also stop seeking validation from someone who made you earn what should have been freely given. You begin to understand that your value was never missing. It was simply misplaced in the hands of someone who benefited from withholding it. For a long time, you looked outward for confirmation, a softer tone, a kinder response, a moment of acknowledgement. You treated these things like proof that you mattered. And every time they were withheld, you worked harder, loved louder, shrank yourself smaller. But now, with the fog gone, you see the truth. Validation that has to be chased is never meant to be caught. This realization is both sobering and liberating. Sobering because you recognize how much of yourself you gave away in the hope of being chosen. Liberating because you finally stop measuring your worth by someone else's ability to see it. You no longer need applause from someone who never learned how to clap for others. And that's when your posture changes, your voice steadies, your decisions come from alignment instead of fear. You don't perform for approval anymore, you live from integrity. And that shift is unmistakable, not loud, not aggressive, just grounded. To them, this feels like rejection, but it isn't. It's in dependence. You're no longer outsourcing your self-esteem to someone who thrived on control. You've taken it back, piece by piece, and rooted it inside yourself where it belongs. This is why their influence fades. Without your need for validation, their approval loses its power. Their silence no longer wounds you. Their words no longer define you. And in that emotional freedom, you experience something new, dignity. You don't need to be seen by someone who refused to truly look at you. You see yourself now. And that self-recognition becomes the foundation you stand on as you move forward, whole, anchored, and no longer available for anything that asks you to betray your own worth. And once your self-worth is anchored within you, the urge to fight fades away. Not because you've lost your voice, but because you've learned where your energy is best spent. This is the moment you understand a truth that changes everything. You don't win by battling someone committed to control. You win by walking away whole. For so long, you thought standing your ground meant standing in the fire. You believed strength looked like endurance, like staying present in conversations that drained you, like proving you were right. But now you see that some battles are designed to keep you stuck, not to be resolved. And choosing not to fight is not surrender. It's strategy. Walking away whole means leaving with your integrity intact. It means refusing to sacrifice your peace for the illusion of closure. You realize that closure doesn't come from mutual understanding, it comes from self-acceptance. And once you accept that you did your best with what you knew at the time, there's nothing left to prove. This is where the dynamic truly ends, because conflict was the last thread connecting you. As long as you were fighting, you were still engaged, still invested, still available. But when you walk away without bitterness, without revenge, without the need to be right, you take that final thread with you. To them, this is incomprehensible. They expect resistance. They expect retaliation. They expect you to stay in the emotional arena. But you've stepped out, not in defeat, but in completion. You've chosen your nervous system over the need to win an argument. And here's the quiet victory. You leave with yourself, your values, your clarity, your future. You don't need to be crowned the winner in their story because you're no longer living in it. Walking away whole is the ultimate assertion of power. It says, without words, that your life is bigger than this chapter and that you trust yourself enough to turn the page. And as you walk away whole, you realize the most profound truth of all. Your healing is not cruel. It is necessary. For years, you may have carried guilt. Guilt for leaving, guilt for detaching, guilt for valuing yourself over someone who demanded more than you could give. But the truth is that staying in a cycle that diminishes you is far crueler than leaving it behind. Choosing yourself is not punishment for them, it's preservation for you. Healing is not a selfish act. It is an act of survival and courage. Every boundary you set, every step you take toward peace, every moment you choose clarity over chaos, is a reclaiming of the life that was quietly stolen from you. It is the cultivation of a garden within yourself that no one else can trample. And the more you tend to it, the more it blooms, until it radiates a kind of light that can't be dimmed by manipulation or fear. This stage is deeply human because it carries both relief and grief. You grieve the time and energy lost, the illusions believed, and the version of yourself that got trapped in endless cycles of validation. And yet you also feel relief. Relief that you finally understand what love without compromise looks like, what respect feels like, and what it means to show up for yourself first. Healing is necessary because it draws a line between who you were and who you are becoming. It is the final act in reclaiming your power, where the lessons you've endured crystallize into wisdom, resilience, and freedom. And in that freedom, you discover the ultimate irony. The moment you truly choose yourself, the panic you once feared in them becomes irrelevant. You are no longer defined by their need or their chaos. You are defined by your courage, your peace, and your unwavering commitment to yourself. This is the liberation that lasts, the victory that no one can take, and the life that finally belongs to you. And now, let me bring this full circle because everything we've explored tonight isn't just about understanding someone else. It's about understanding yourself. Every stage, every lesson, every silent step you took toward peace has led to this moment, the moment where you realize that power was never theirs to hold. It was always yours. And the true triumph isn't about proving them wrong, winning an argument, or forcing recognition. The real victory is waking up each day with your heart intact, your mind clear, and your spirit unshaken. Imagine what life feels like when you are no longer tethered to someone else's chaos. Imagine the relief of making decisions that honor your worth, the peace of not needing validation from anyone who thrives on manipulation, and the clarity of living in alignment with your truth. That's what this journey is about. That's what happens when you choose yourself fully, unapologetically, and without hesitation. And here's the most inspiring part. This is available to anyone willing to take that step. Healing, detachment, self-respect, and freedom, they aren't privileges for the few. They're rights for everyone who decides to stop giving away pieces of themselves to someone who doesn't deserve them. You've already walked the hardest part when you faced the truth, saw the patterns, and chose to leave what no longer serves you. Everything else, the confidence, the calm, the resilience, flows naturally from that choice. So I want you to leave today with one undeniable truth. The panic you feared in them, the control they once held over your emotions, the chaos that made you question yourself. None of it matters anymore. You have stepped into your power, you are whole, you are free, and that freedom, it is unstoppable, unshakable, and beautifully yours. Hold it, own it, live it, because your story doesn't end with them, it begins with you.